So hopefully you're taking the time to go back and review these presentations that we're doing. We're trying to do them monthly on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. and that has to change sometimes because of travel schedules and so forth, but we're trying to stick to it. And if you take a moment to go to our assetmap.com site /webinars, you're going to see all of these recorded sessions. And I will be honest with you that I actually happen to go back occasionally and watch some of them myself, just to remind myself of all the kind of good stuff that we've come up with and make sure that we're using it in our practice. So please take a moment to remind yourself that you could use this, watch this on the on your phone. You could listen to it in your car, like a podcast. It's set up so that it's accessible or shareable by you with your teams. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Adam Holt. I'm the founder of AssetMap, and this series is part of our educational program called Let's Talk Long-Term Care. And of course, the supporting conversations that we have with customers using AssetMap. As we have done in the past, let me just walk you through a quick agenda of what we're going to accomplish in the next 25 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about wealth management with respect to long-term care and the state of the LTC marketplace, specifically in the US, and then how we tend to have conversations about this with our customers that give us top-of-mind impact so that we're asking good questions and letting clients know that we can help them address some of these questions. There are going to be 3 opportunities. I'm going to show you how to use AssetMap specifically to drive conversations that matter in LTC. They're going to start with the fire drills, and then we're going to go right into the platform. I'm going to show you how I'm doing this with current clients and how you can really monetize this conversation, or at least clarify it for customers. We're going to do it through both the asset map and the target maps. We're going to accomplish this all in 25 minutes, and then I'm going to share with you some other resources. Now, interestingly enough, when we put these presentations together, we want to make sure that everybody understands the real context of this, right? So long-term care is not about long-term care insurance. It's about how are we going to fund a potential obligation. And when we talk about wealth management, as we have in several other podcasts, we tend to talk about a lot of these topics that we've tried to address with AssetMap. And the reality is that long-term care events literally impact every one of these decisions. And when you think about it, you can't talk about cash flow and retirement without thinking about, well, what if we have a long-term care event? Or how's this going to affect my banking and liquidity? Or, what liabilities am I not going to be able to cover? Or what is it going to mean for my estate? The long-term care is one of these interesting things where we call it a disruptor because it comes in and basically wipes out all your plans. And unless we have a plan, and I would submit to everyone on this call that everybody does have a plan. The challenge is the default plan is self-funding. And the question is really, can we afford to self-fund, or can we use government programs, or should we try to insure it? And that's really the point of this discussion, is to try to figure out for our households whether we should self-fund, offload the risk, or insure it. So let me kind of tell you what's going on in my research on the long-term care market, and this is really just 4 or 5 minutes on what's happening at a high level. Interestingly enough, I found some revised demographics from the NAIC, which is one of the best sources for long-term care information because it's an insurance council, and this specifically is their research on long-term care. And I thought it was much worse. And maybe it's because long-term care tends to be one of those doomsday discussions where you think it's going to be cataclysmic expense, but it may not be. I will tell you that personally, in my family, both my grandparents on my mother's side needed long-term care. At the time, some 25 years ago, there was no long-term care insurance. They didn't know about it. Unfortunately, my mom literally quit her job to help take care of her parents, spent all of her money, burned through all of the parents' money, and then they wound up in a Medicaid facility and basically passed on penniless. Not the most, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Dignified end to what they had hoped to achieve, both on an estate level as well as some charitably. But it was a really big lesson to show how this thing can really set people back. And it probably set my mom back, of all people, about 10 years. So when the conversations in financial planning come up, and I can relate personally, the real question is this going to happen to me or the people that I take care of in my family or my customers? So here's some of the stats. 52% of those people over 65 are going to need some kind of care. And what's really driving some of the bigger problems is the increase in Alzheimer's, and this is really a predominance on how people are living longer. And so I read an interesting stat that said that some 35% of those over 80 will experience Alzheimer's or dementia. And this is critical because it doesn't always express the need in physical terms. For example, I cannot walk and therefore I need someone to help me. It could also be someone needs to take care of me 24 hours a day. Now, women are interestingly 25% more likely to need long-term care than men. Obviously, it's about longevity. And they tend to obviously stay on this planet longer statistically. But what was interesting about this is that the actual need for nursing home for 2 years, 2 years is the average need for care. But in a nursing home specifically, women are spending longer time in a nursing home. And I think this is mostly revealed by the fact that men are lasting with a spouse that is actually able to take care of them in some measure, whereas women are not because they're usually a survivor or a widow in this case. What was surprising to me was this: 2% of men and 7% of women will need more than 5 years of care. I thought this number was low, but it's really indicative of the fact that I think we tend to overestimate what the care will be because it tends to be end-of-life planning. And it's probably why there's only been about 7 million policies sold in the US to date. And I believe that this is really about the other guy attitude, which is it always happens to the other guy. And so we don't think that it's going to happen to us. We've heard plenty of times in our practice where someone says, well, we have a plan and the plan is you're going to roll me off the cliff or knock me off the bridge. And of course, we've seen all but 2 families actually do this. We don't think it's the best plan and clearly not something that we want to put in writing. But the point is that, we tend to make a lot of excuses about this happening or not happening, and so we don't deal with it. And if you look at the actual costs here, I thought this was interesting between adult daycare, assisted living, and nursing home, that you see a big disparity in costs where the median nursing home is running $82,000 to $92,000 a year. I couldn't quite figure what the difference is between a semi-private room versus a private room. I think semi-private room means that you're sharing it with your roommate, and it's private to everybody else but your roommate. Kind of like semi-sweet chocolate. I think that's still sweet. I don't really know the difference, but you can see the difference in cost here, that privacy costs an extra 10 grand. This I thought was funny. The average nursing home in Monroe, Louisiana versus Manhattan is a staggering $100,000. And so when we talk about the numbers and try to educate our customers, really what winds up being a big predictor of cost is actually dementia. And so look at the costs here and differences between those end-of-life care costs in dementia versus not having it. And the reason is because people with physical malady can tend to not necessarily need the same level of care overnight. Interesting about this, when we talk to our customers, here's what we really should be talking about. Long-term care events are typically not about you. Now, what does that mean? The reality is that it's really impacting the spouse, the family, as I mentioned in my story, and the estate. So long-term care in many ways is really an asset protection strategy. And if you look at the traditional long-term care marketplace, it's really been decimated. And why? It's because they keep raising premiums and they're making it unaffordable to the people who've already purchased it. And so therefore you're seeing we've gone from 125 carriers to less than 15 in 14 years, ending 2014. I would say it's less than that today. And what's happened is that the life insurance and annuity marketplaces have created these hybrid products to solve the estate risks using the longevity risk. And the number of policies sold per year has jumped from 72,000 to over 300,000 just since 2013. And we think that's going to continue to expand as worksite platforms try to solve this problem as well. What you need to stay in mind of is, well, when is the time to start thinking about this? We're seeing actually, I thought this was really interesting, that declines for applications for long-term care in the 50s, that range when people start to think about this is about 17%, versus you wait till you're in your 70s and 50% almost getting declined. So critically, it's important to answer these questions early. That's really the point of this stat, in my opinion, is you got to answer this question. What are we doing? Are we self-funding? Are we insuring? Are we moving assets now? So here's the things that I want you to kind of remember as takeaways from some of this stuff, which is clearly dementia matters. It's going to cost several $100,000. Even though it's a lot of money, the burden will really be on the family because they're going to step up big time or have to. And your default approach is that you're self-funding. So the question is, when we look at the asset map, where's the liquidity going to come from to fund this goal? if you're self-funding, where is the money going to come from? And I'm going to show you this using this. And maybe if you're going to insure it, you should be using it as an asset or an estate protection strategy. Okay, so that's really the educational side of long-term care that we tend to walk our clients through. Now let's talk about the frameworks of how you talk about this intentionally in a meeting. Well, many of you guys have already known that we came up with this framework, which we've now starting to recall the financial fire drills, because when we look at the asset map, we're tending to ask the question, what's the plan to deal with certain events, right? And thankfully, they've come out in the 6L. So if you already know this and you memorized it, then that's awesome. I'm just going to reiterate that. If you don't know about the 6Ls, the idea is to ask a household, what's the household plan to address the following situations, and then just listen. A long-term care event we know is going to set you back big time. What's your plan to deal with it? Show me where I can fund it. I'm going to actually take some time now to just jump into the platform. If you just remember that, what's the plan to deal with these events? I think you're going to find that you're going to get a lot of traction in starting to ask the questions. Now, I've already created some households, so I'm going to go to a household and I'm going to show you actually how to find a list of these. I've got a lot of households and I want to work on one. And I created a filter in my household index called those individuals who are over 50 years old, 55 years old, a net worth of over $250,000, because I think those are the people that are going to want to protect their assets. But assets less than 5 million, because I don't want them to have so much money that they're not going to care, and they currently have no long-term care. I created this filter, and what you're going to see is not only did I kind of save this output, you'll see here's the different filters I've created, but I've also changed the headings. So I could decide which ones I want to focus on, because I'm going to try to determine whether this is a high prospect for this or not, whether they have a concern. I'm not going to use this $30 million insured client. I'm going to use the Barton household for this example. Now, what do we typically know about the Barton's household? Let's look at their asset map here for a second. Okay, so what do we know about the Bartons? The Bartons are in their late 50s, so probably a time to start thinking about doing something here. They have a 15-year-old son, and hey, look at this, they've got Beatrice. So Nana or Mama, whatever you want to call her, she's basically part of the family. And I'll kind of walk you through this. So Jerry's got a good job. He's expecting Social Security to be there. He's got a 401k. He's got an old 401k that he left at his employer. And he's got a money market account, some cash value life insurance. You can see he's got about $500,000 of life insurance. Elise is a teacher. She's also expecting a pension, some Social Security, a 403b, pretty common stuff, a CD. And then she's got some savings. They've got a couple different debts here you can see against a good value home. So, all in all, these people are worth about $1.5 million. You can see their branches, about $500,000 in each of their individual and their joint branches, and they've got some insurance. At a high level, what I tend to talk about with people is, well, okay, I'm looking at the map. Maybe I'll run through my 6Ls and I'll say, what's your plan to deal with a couple of these events that are going to set you back? How are we going to deal with long-term care? If I don't feel comfortable talking about that, I tend to apply a stencil. And if you watch what I'm doing, I'm actually going to apply something that you have access to called the building blocks stencil. I'm going to choose not to apply all of the stencil items to this household, but rather in the conversations, I'm going to talk just about long-term care, and I'm going to apply that to Jerry. I'm actually going to do the same thing, and I'm going to do that exact same thing to his spouse, Elise. And what's going to happen, if you saw it, is that now a long-term care policy popped up, stenciled in their map for discussion. I will tend to print this to PDF, and I will print this out and put it in front of them and make sure that when I review their current state of affairs, how's Jerry doing? How's Elise? How's Henry doing? I've looked at your life insurance. By the way, I didn't know if you have long-term care because I don't see a strategy here for funding a long-term care event. I pause on purpose because I want people to sink that in and also, or let that sink in and then answer the question of what their approach is. Most people will not have a default approach and they'll scramble to try to figure it out with your help. which is good because now we can educate people as to why we need to contemplate this or at least have a plan of action in the event that something should happen to either one of them. Most of the time, you can imagine the education is about understanding what it will cost or how it tends to play out or what are some real scenarios that you can relate to, like the one I shared of my own family, or ones that could be impactful for yourself that are real and relatable so that people understand that they are consciously making a decision to either do something about it or not. I will typically ask people to say, point out from me where we can take the money if we had a long-term care event. Well, Adam, what does that mean? Well, we'll give you an example. If Jerry has to spend $90,000 more a year for the next few years, where's that money going to come from? Because clearly he can't go to work. Can I start blowing out the 401k? Can we liquidate this? This will cover maybe a year and a half of it. There's some tax benefits here. And boy, maybe can I start the pension early? And most of the answers to these questions are no way, Adam. And the truth is mostly because people haven't done an intentional plan here. And liquidating retirement plans that are intended clearly for retirement is not what their ideal is. So often we have to do this, drop a placeholder here so that when we print the PDF, it's in their face and they obviously have a choice to address it in a non-threatening way. By the way, you'll notice I put Beatrice in here because next to Jerry, her son, if I click on Beatrice, what you will learn is that I put some notes here, or my co-advisor put some notes on here, and he said that they're taking care of mom, weekends and one night a week, bringing meals to help her out because she's 80, but it's likely that there's going to be some financial dependency and their concerns of spend down of what dad left mom to live on for the rest of her life, which means there may be a financial obligation between these two people. It probably makes sense to complete an asset map on Beatrice so that we understand what assets she has in order to cover obligations like this, and we don't have to dip into your own assets like my mother had to, okay? That's the first way of approaching the asset map conversation about long-term care, and we find it's very, very easy to start a conversation when you just drop this tile here and basically say, hey, what's the plan? I don't see a plan. Let me educate you. The second way is by using the target map models. And the target maps literally are just an attempt to try to figure out what it's going to cost to fund something and whether it makes sense for you to fund it, insure it, ignore it, fund it monthly, fund it annually, whatever it is. The hope is to try to say, what is the real cost of this event? And if you've ever used them before, I'm choosing to add a target map. I'm just going to, for simplicity's sake, do a model on Jerry for just long-term care. It's using my templates and my preferences that have already been set up for me over in my preferences section up here, where you can see the target map preferences. And what it just did is it actually just built a model for long-term care. Now, what are some of the assumptions that it made? Well, let's look at what I want. My default for me, Adam, is to apply an annual care of 4 years as the average, I'd say, pain point for most people. I choose 90,000 because it's a round, believable number, similar to some of the stats I showed you. It's a net spendable dollar. I assume this event happens today in order to make it real. Sometimes showing events that happen in the future is really hard for people to contemplate because they don't know how to understand the future value. So often I will try to quantify the cost by saying, if I needed care for 4 years at $90,000 a year from age 57 to 61 today, basically, I need to do a couple things to my home. I need to modify my home. I need to coordinate my care with some of the other people in my family and train them, which includes caregiver training. And I need to provide that and have that money available today. I assume that I can earn 5% on my money, but I haven't assigned anything to actually cover that expense. Now, on the off chance that someone says, well, you know what, Adam, we've got the savings that is kind of our rainy day fund. We can apply that $30,000. Fantastic. I would say that basically the impact to you is I got to find another $355,000 net in order to cover this obligation and be able to have no impact to the family. And by the way, since you don't have $355,000, it's going to basically take a hit to your monthly balance sheet of about $7,600 a month inflated at 3% over that 4-year period. If I take out inflation, it's almost $8,000 net spendable a month to self-fund this. Okay, I hope you understand what that means. It basically means that you're either, if you had to write these checks, I got to find something that's generating $8,000 in your portfolio to cover this, to have no impact. We know what's going to happen. You're going to lose $8,000 a month, or you're going to find some cheaper way to do it, and that's not something financially you can sustain. That's option number one. And for those people that are actually using the long-term care, I tend to generate the PDFs, download them, and when somebody says, no, I'm not really going to self-insure this, well, what's going on here? Oh, there it is. If someone says I'm going to self-insure this thing, I'll tend to give them their a copy of this, and I'll ask them to sign off on it, that we talked about it. And that's been a good defensive strategy for us to help people understand how important it is, because I don't want this coming back on me 10 years from now, where the kids say, why didn't you guys answer this question? You should have brought it up. And I basically say, I did. I showed it to them, and Jerry said he didn't want to do it. And he said, I'm not doing anything about it. I'm self-insuring. And it basically, that's why you have no estate, son, in this case. So that's number one. The more common way to do this today, as we're training it, is actually do this in the retirement analysis, because everybody tends to run the target map analysis or do some kind of modeling on retirement. It's almost easier to show this contextually. Here's an example of what they want in retirement, and just to acclimate you, what they've said is they want to provide living expenses at Jerry's age 70, and for those 20 years they want to spend $100,000. They want a richer early years. We call them the go-go years. But in the later years, 91 to 100, from Jerry's 90 there for 10 years, we can take our spending down to $60,000, and the real reason is because we expect actually that there will be one remaining spouse, okay? But in the early years, they also want to spend up until, let's say, 80 years old. They actually want to do some travel, and that's going to cost $10,000. So all in all, you can tell that it's going to cost about $1.7 million to fund this retirement stream, assuming 5%. They've got several different assets that are available and some income sources. You can see that here. We've tax adjusted affected them. And over the next 12.2 years until they retire, we need to hit a savings rate of about $2,000 a month. Now, this is pretty normal, and there's lots of conversations you can have around this, whether you like the numbers or not. We can clearly increase the return expectation. We could decrease it. But the real message here is the following. Sometimes getting this number to an appealing number is our goal, right? We want to show people how far away they are from reaching their goal, and of course, what it's going to take to fund it. But sometimes illustrating what the long-term care would be is as easy as the following. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clone this retirement map. And what's going to happen is it's going to create a copy, which I'm going to edit the name, and I'm going to call it long-term care at 80. I'm going to keep all my assumptions the same, but now I'm going to go back to what you want, and I have created before this meeting actually a line item here that says, what happens if we have a long-term care event at 80 for those 4 years at the same rate of 90,000 with a COLA of 5%, which actually matches my expected return, which is why the present value of this is the same. Well, what assets do I have now to cover this? I don't have any new assets that didn't just appear. And so what it really shows is the contrast between actually choosing to self-insure and having the money to cover it versus not insure, and the impact in your actual savings. You can fight this. I can understand why. I haven't used the homes. I've left off certain cash assets that they imagine would be estates, but I'm assuming all things being equal, the real impact of a long-term care and self-funding it over the next 12 years is a matter of almost $2,600. There's long-term care not included. There's a long-term care event included for one person. The real question that I think we need to ask when we show this side by side with people is that here's your retirement without long-term care. Here it is with it. This is a big difference in self-funding. Tell me, can you save $4,600 a month so I can create a sinking fund that's growing at 5% for one person, or does it make sense for me to insure or look for a way to solve this problem at a less net spread of cost? And if somebody is in that range of insurable and probably can get coverage, it's very likely that they could actually save significant dollars on getting a positive outcome here by potentially insuring this. And that's really up to you to look at to see if that math works. But typically what I would do is we would show retirement with and without long-term care. And it's very impactful, especially if you can get them to sign off if they choose to take nothing and do nothing about it, because you want to show that you actually did the right thing by people. Here's the recap before we go to Q&A. Clearly, I hope you realize here, long-term care impacts the overall wealth management. And so if you're not talking about it and you're calling yourself a wealth manager, now you hopefully will start. The default for all of us is self-funding, right? So where's the money allocated for this? Show me on the map how you're going to address this problem. It's a fire drill. What are we going to do? Show me which resources I can liquidate to cover it, and I've got to quantify this sometimes to make it real for you. Otherwise, it's just this obscure conversation that you don't know how to quantify or relate to. And hopefully, if you do this in the target map or whatever planning tool you're using, you got to show people the impact to their retirement savings with and without an event. Otherwise, you're leaving them flat. So you got to show them your default assumption is that you're self-insuring and that you're likely going to have an event. Is that the plan? So the family's got to remember you this way? Hopefully not, because ultimately this infects the entire families. And we shouldn't be ignorant and leave out mom in our example here, who possibly could be a big, significant financial drain in her later years that was not intentional because they're trying to save on the dignity side and they didn't do anything about it. Here's some other resources that you can find. If you go to the webinar page, you'll see that there are several other programs that we did on long-term care that touch on it. You see specifically the 6 Ls. We did ones just on long-term care target map and how you come up with some of these numbers. There are also resources in your support center that give you links to every single state and their average pricing. So feel free to explore that by typing in long-term care in the support center. And get good at doing this, because I think the conversation is really important. I remember what I told you, the other guy syndrome, right? It always happens to the other guy. Well, to everyone else, you and me, we are the other guy. So at the end of the day, we have to address this because it's a very real issue. Let's go to Q&A, and we'll stop the recording at this time so that we can take our time for questions. Michael, can you join the meeting?
I'm here.
Fantastic. Are there any open questions that have come through that are not resolved at this time?
There are none.
Okay, great. Are there any that make sense to share with the rest of the community? I see a couple coming in.
John Burney. John, I don't use retirement money to fund these hybrid options, but some reps seem excited about using qualified funds. What are your feelings about that, Adam?
My feelings. I know. I love when you ask me about my feelings. I can only assume, John, that the retirement money funding long-term care is usually because they have enough assets, because there is a tax preference on using using retirement assets, because obviously they're fully taxable. Long-term care expenses exceeding certain figures of your itemized deduction are deductible. As you know, maybe some of the tax laws change on that, but for the most part, someone spending $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 on long-term care would be able to deduct a good amount of that income. So yes, that could be done. I think retirement plans are a horrible long-term estate plan, even though there are some people that disagree and believe that the stretch IRA will be its savings grace. And so for those people that are leaving retirement plans as their long-term care buffer, yeah, maybe that would work. But I would argue pretty vehemently that if somebody's insurable, I would probably take distributions from an IRA that doesn't need to be consumed because of the RMD and use that to siphon off the life with LTC to create an even bigger tax-free estate, if that's really the intent. I've seen it 100 times mathematically, and it works if somebody's generously insurable to use RMDs to basically buy life with LTC. There's another question here. Great. This is a recording. So yes, this is recorded. It'll be available in the next day, I believe, until we get it formatted and up on our site at assetmap.com/webinars.
One best practice that I saw, Adam, was during our boot camp, where the advisor placed on the long-term care tile when they spoke to the client and when the client declined that discussion.
Interesting. That's a great idea.
Typed right in the second text field on the asset map, and then they left the long-term tile on the asset map for the every year after that. So where it says insurance carrier right there, they typed in there refused June 11th, 2018. And they saved it.
June. That's great.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And then saved it.
And then made a 0. Sure. Why not? I love that. That's a great idea.
And then left it there.
Refused. I should write ignorant over the top. No, I should. This is fine. But as long as, you can obviously put some notes in your CRM about this. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Thanks for sharing that, Michael. Okay.
And I think that's it, Adam.
All right. So if you do have questions,